We are up to our fourth lesson in Book Smart, and today we are discussing a new term, another term that we haven't discussed in earlier weeks, and that is called Halacha, or in the Hebrew pronunciation, it would be called Halacha. But I'm going to use the Ashkenazic Russian, but more Ashkenazic term called halacha in a single statement, halacha, okay? Halacha in a word describes Jewish law. Halacha is Jewish law. Here, there's room right here, Weiss's right there, yeah. Jewish law, to introduce the concept of halacha, I think let's first quickly glance at our maps just so we place it at the time and place. And you have the map on here. So I got a copy of the map for myself this time. So you have on the left, of course, we have the Torah, and then on the right and the rest of the page is two columns, red, orange, and we're looking for that another shaded orange. Halachic works. See halachic works? Mm-hmm. And halachic works, halachic, it comes from the word halacha, so something that belongs to halacha, you say halachic. So when someone says an halachic authority, there'll be someone who's an expert on Jewish law. So it's all from the same word. Halacha, halacha, same word. Halachic works are works of people who were who figured out or spent their time decoding Jewish law. You have the Torah, where things are based on. You have midrashic work with the commentaries. Last week we discussed Mishnah and Gemara, and then moved on. Then they came to the next phase. Before I get into detail, you could run through. You have the Gaonim. That's the name of the sages, but the rabbis who followed the Gemara times. So the Gemara sages were called Tanaim and Amoraim. But following them called the Gaonim. Gaonim literally means geniuses, but they were called Gaonim. And you have some key people, Gershon Romaints, the Alfasi, you have the Maram Rutenberg, the Rambam, Mishnah Torah, you have Rashba, Rosh, Tur, Rashbatz, Shulchan Aruch. We're going to discuss some of this today, but it just shows you how it moved over time. And as you see, this line continues until today. You see the timeline on the bottom of years when this started to be worked on. So this started by this started based on Jewish law, but it really started in the year around 600 and then continues until today. This doesn't end, and I believe in today's class you'll understand why. It doesn't end. There's no end date to Jewish law. Okay. You could keep looking at it or look here, but why do we need halacha? Last week we went into like a full discussion of how wonderful Talmud, Gemara is. You have the Mishnah, you have them discussing parts of Jewish life, right? We had a full class about it, and we got a glimpse into some of the things that they discuss. And you could say, well, Gemara, you told us, was not just laws, it was also commentary and some stories, right? And allegories. You had that in the work, but the core of it is laws. So what comes next after the law was written? So what's needed after that? What was the Gemara missing that the whole group of people, geniuses for that matter, come along and start writing about it? They're not writing commentary on the Talmud. So what are they doing? And why does it continue until today? Yeah.
It's because they were living dispersed and living with different rulers over them and then trying to work out how to follow Halacha in their own special circumstances.
It is that and more. Yeah.
But the Gemara doesn't actually lay out the laws. There's a whole lot of discussion. Maybe it's this way, maybe it's that way. And I'm guessing that the Goenim that came afterwards said, okay, now what's the core here?
Yeah.
What are the actual laws that we can derive from here?
Most people are not Talmud scholars, and so they needed something for the ordinary person on what they should do each day.
Well said. Well said. You look at the Gemara, you start learning, and besides for your head spinning, because it's, as we said, it jumps subjects back and forth. You end up with a page saying, okay, so what in the world am I meant to do? So I know this guy says that guy says that guy, something else, and each one comes to something else, but at the end of the day, what do I do? And for them, it wasn't the problem. Because when they, for example, I think you have it in the text today, but when they discuss the laws of Shema, what's their question? The question is, until when could you read the Shema? And you have this little story that students, one rabbi says this, one rabbi says that, and then a few students were out partying or doing something else, and they come back home and they tell their father or their teacher, we didn't pray the evening service, we didn't say Shema, until when could we do it? And he says you can do it until dawn. That's what the Mishnah opens, the laws of Shema. See, from just mentioning that, the Mishnah is already concluding that, you know that Shema has to be said. You know what has to be said. You know already that it's a specific time that it needs to be said. You're just not sure exactly. They assume you already know all that. So they didn't have to tell you every evening when it's night, you say the Shema. We know that already. We're not here to codify what needs to be done. We're here to preserve, if you remember, to preserve the discussions over how it was taught. So with these types of discussions in place, it left many people in the dark. And not only left people in the dark, it left people confused, not just those who were dispersed, it just had this unorganized system to it that, things are said and done and discussed and everything's obvious, but day to day, I still like to get the basic user's manual to do what you need to do during the day. And so that's where these rabbis came in. They said, we need a system. We need a system in place of how to do it. And they work hard. They work really hard, and they don't always agree with each other on everything. And they needed to hash things out over time. There are things that were set that over time were accepted or rejected. Every law that they came up with, or they concluded that this is the law, they needed, as you remember, they needed to cite proof for it, and not just the line in the Torah. It needed to be more than that. Obviously, the line in the Torah starts, but they needed backing of not just, okay, this is what you do today, but this is what you do today in any given situation. So let's take the Shema. What if someone didn't read the Shema because they couldn't read the Shema? What happens then? Or what if someone missed the morning Shema, missed the morning services, and just notices that they missed it during the afternoon prayers? What do you do then? So there's a time that it's not relevant anymore, or you could say it, but it would be considered already the evening Shema, and you miss the morning Shema.
The morning tomorrow's long, and we can't say it.
Let's take the Amida, for example. If someone misses the morning Amida, they say it twice during the afternoon service. So some things could be compensated for, some things not. But they take the time to try to figure out who, what, when, how. And different rabbis that you saw on that chart provided different approaches to how this was done. And they spent years of their lives figuring this out. And until today, it's being discussed and worked on. Because as time progresses, you have new, can't say problems, but new issues coming up. New conflicts, new ideas that keep coming up. And it's left to them to figure out, how do you make this work? Because the Talmud's talking about a horse and buggy, but what about Tesla today, right? How do you work that into law? And so all these rabbis throughout time, they spent their years clarifying what the law is, and then trying to present it in the most clear way. Sometimes they haven't fully succeeded on the clarity, and there was someone else who came after and provided that. So for example, actually, before I give you examples, let's look at the importance of laws and the meaning of the word halacha, and then we'll go a bit deeper into this, okay? In Exodus, it says this instruction. Instruct them on the statuses and the teachings, make known to them the way on which they should go and the actions that they should do. This is from this past week's Parsha, actually, this past week's reading, where Yisro, the father-in-law of Moshe, tells him, you brought the Torah to the people, but you need to explain it to them. You say you want a birthday party, but say what you would like at the birthday party. Do you want a chocolate cake or a brownie? Do you want just family, or you also want friends and neighbors? Explain what you want and what you need. Not out of questioning, just out of respecting and fully understanding and fully observing. And the instruction here is that it is the obligation, our obligation, to pass on the teachings, the chukim, the statuses, but it's really laws, to pass them on so everyone could practice it on their own. Because a rabbi doing the mitzvot does not cover for another person, right? Each one's obligated to live their life. And the fact that someone else ate breakfast doesn't make you full, right? You need the breakfast too, right? Sometimes the smell of coffee could wake you up, but if you need the coffee, you need to drink the coffee too. Each one has the obligation of practicing and living a full life. The Maral explains, and you have this in text too, if you look inside, the word Torah means instruction. Torah means hora'ah. For the function of Torah is to instruct us in the actions that we should do. That is why it is specifically the 5 books of Moses that are called Torah, as they contain the mitzvot. They contain the commandments. Now, that's Torah. And there's a value in studying Torah. And as I said last week, there's a value in studying Jewish law. There's a value in studying Talmud as well. Even if you don't come out with the exact instruction of here's what you need to do, the fact that you're spending time studying is already a blessed pursuit. You're studying, study itself is a mitzvah regardless of what happens next. You're studying. The studying is something holy, especially studying something holy, but studying is something holy. The word halacha The word halacha means holech, comes from the word holech in Hebrew, which means to walk on a certain road, to follow, or in another way to say, to follow a path. Holech b'derech yeshara means following the right path. And it also means the way, as in, bless you, not just walking, but the way itself. So walking in the path, both words have a connection from that root word of, or connected to the root word of halacha. So we say halacha, which we translate as law, but really it's the proper path to follow. That's when we say halacha. Halacha is the proper path, the proper way to live. And as every road, there are, you could go off the road and you could go back on the road, right? On the road itself, there are different lanes, right? You could go, faster, slower, right? It's up to you how you proceed on that path. But if you're on that path, that means you're following the right way. That's the meaning of the word. Now, when you picture Jewish law, typically people will think about religious law. When you think of Jewish law, give me a mitzvah. When you think of law, when I say Jewish law, what are you thinking about? Fasting, Yom Kippur, anyone? What else? Huh? Lighting candles. What else? Putting on tefillin. Throw them out. You don't have to wait. Keep Shabbat. Charity. Washing your hands. Great examples. Thanks for playing exactly to the point I'm trying to make. When we say Jewish law, where do we associate it with ritual law? You notice? The only exception would be maybe charity, but the rest, we talk about religious practice. But Jewish law, most of it is not about what you would consider mitzvahs. It's about life, how to live life. The same amount of attention that is given to Shabbos and holidays, triple that, and that's how much is dedicated, more than triple that, that's how much is dedicated to business practices and civil law, which is called nizikim. That's the term for it. But so much more is dedicated to that. Why is that? Because Jewish law is really the laws of life. As in, to practice Judaism, obviously it also means what you mentioned, Shabbos, etc. That's also that. But to practice Jewish law means that when you've got a shop, you're honest in how you're running the store. And there's no price for two different people who come in. It's a set price that you announce. And when you're signing a contract, you honor your word, and so many other details. It plays into every single aspect of life. Down to if you're driving a car and you're about, God forbid, you're about to hit someone, Jewish law has an opinion on where you should keep the steering wheel towards, straight, right, or left, considering the brake is not an option. But it goes down to that detail. And that's why you have so many books written, so many works written just on halacha, because it touches so many topics and it's relevant to so many areas of life. So Shabbos is set books, and and that's it. But there's nothing. Shabbos is discussed endlessly, but Shabbos is Shabbos. But if you think of any activity that you do during the day, down to, I'll give you an example. if you have a plate, they have charcuterie boards today, right? With all these, it could be cheese, it could be meats, right? And you have fruits and you have nuts and you have some vegetables there and crackers. Jewish law tells you what you should be eating first. Not as in what you should be eating more of, that's your business. But from amongst fruits, what is most worthy to make a blessing on first? Think of any other scenario in daily life, and I'll give you an example of how Jewish law chimes in about it. Anything really.
Animals.
Animals, yeah. Animals, it goes on to detail on how to feed them, right? The fact that they have to eat before you. Now, if you've got a pet, Jewish law says you need to feed the pet before you feed yourself. The fact that there's strict instructions on never causing it harm, and it goes down to detail of how to feed it on Shabbos and on Pesach, for example. Does your pet need kosher for Passover foods? I think our newspaper last month had all about Judaism and pets. Yeah. If you read it, if not, I could get you a copy. All about Judaism and pets. Yeah. Goes down to detail. It's any area. Halacha touches in some way or other. So you look at all that, and let's for a moment here appreciate on page 150, let's appreciate how halacha was an address over time for new subjects and questions that came up. And every time that happened, they turned to the rabbis for their opinion. So you have here one case of, they asked this Atlanta rabbi, Rabbi Geffen, is Coca-Cola kosher? And the original answer, by the way, was no. It had some kind of animal, what's that? Like, extract, but it, no, it wasn't the coloring. I think it was, I forgot which ingredient, but it came from animal, and he gets, and this is 1935. He gets access to their recipe and he says, no, this cannot be kosher. And instead of telling him and everyone else saying too bad, they went and figured out how to make this from a plant-based or some other chemical. And obviously Coke is kosher today without a kosher supervision because they went through the ingredients, but they addressed on that. You have here, let's see, 1977, conjoined twins share a single 6-chambered heart, and separating them would save the life of one of them but kill the other, should the procedure be performed. They addressed it to Rabbi Feinstein on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Another question they addressed him in 1978. When volunteers respond to a medical emergency on Shabbos, are they permitted to drive home after the emergency has been taken care of? Ever thought of that? You're allowed to desecrate Shabbat to save a life. So do anything. You're allowed to drive to the hospital. Driving back, what gives you the excuse to drive back? Is your meal urgent? Is the gefilte fish urgent? Is it life-saving? No, it's a different factor, a different story. So they addressed, yeah.
I know what the response was to the conjoined twins.
Yeah.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
Depends on how it goes today, but we'll get to that, yeah. Because there's a key factor to understand before we answer that, yeah.
Are these answers compiled somewhere in a database that ordinary people can access in English? I mean, I think fascinated to know the answers to some of these.
Yes, they are fascinating. They're not. They're not in one place, and the reason is, I don't know if that's the reason, but let's take driving back. Okay, that's the 1978 example. Okay. I believe what he answered then was they're allowed to drive back. Now, what's his reasoning for why they're allowed to drive back? It's not an emergency. Well, something very obvious. They were part of a volunteer medical group called Hatzalah, if you've heard of it. Every major Jewish community in the world has, bless you, a Hatzalah group. Montreal, where I'm from, has, LA has a few, New York has 8 separate groups in different neighborhoods. Miami has, Boca Raton has, like every major, London, Sydney, all over. If they're the ones that are serving, if they're the ones that are responding to medical emergencies, let's say it takes them now 2 hours to get back home from the hospital. It's possible. What if there's another medical emergency that they would be needed for? And they're not around. Now, technically, there are other volunteers around, but still, maybe they would be the closest ones. They would have expertise in a specific area. So he tells them, you could go back home. You could go back home because you're going back home not to eat the gefilte fish, you're going back home to be available for another call. Yes, Andy?
I'd be free to leave my car in the garage or whatever to get broken into while you're walking home.
I assume they parked in a hospital parking lot, which is fairly safe. I mean, I hope. Yeah. Okay, so this is from New York, and let's see, Zurich. 1963, may a person undergo cosmetic surgery for the purpose of improving their appearance? Today it's a given, right? Right? But then it was a new area that wasn't discussed, and cutting into someone's body is wrong because you're harming the body. But what if it's for cosmetic surgery? So they dealt with it back then. So you look at these questions that came up, you look at the times, the eras that they were raised, and you see how Jewish law just covers pretty much everything under the sun. Everything. Yeah.
There's getting rid of people my age, which is not a thing, is children who are born with these horrible things that I guess. They're different, but they're all cosmetic.
Yep. I'm not providing answers. I mean, if you want, I could give you an answer, but we're not providing answers. We're just trying to illustrate here. Illustrate. You want an answer. We all want an answer. Well, oh, wait. Going back to the medical emergency car, okay? Even if the rabbi answered what he answered in 1978, cars have advanced since, right? The technology has advanced. And think of the weight of someone sitting in a car, or that was one of the reasons why you can't ride a car on Shabbos if someone else is driving, because the weight of a person is causing the engine to work a bit stronger. Today, some cars, it does not affect any longer. It's not a factor anymore. Or, for example, opening up the fridge. Opening up the fridge does not immediately turn the cooler on, but leave it open long enough, that cooler is starting to work because the temperature just moved up. So there was a discussion about whether or not you could open up a fridge. And I'm not even talking about the light that opens in the fridge. Today you already, what's that company? GE, Samsung, all these companies created Shabbos fridges. All right, they created that. And on these Shabbos fridges, you have set that on Saturday and from Friday night, the light does not turn on when you open the door of the freezer or fridge. And you take, I know we had like a ice maker in our house. Every time we opened up that little drawer to take out the ice, it started working. That's an issue. And we just used to wait around until the machine worked, and then we open up the drawer and empty it out and then close it back in, all right? But these are answers that were given at the time, but even if I gave you the answer to the question the answer that this rabbi gave in 78, that answer may have been updated since, not may, chances are it has been updated since, like the plastic surgery, for example. Today it's a seamless, so to speak, seamless process, especially compared to earlier, and the the pain or the recovery is less than once, and the tools they use is more advanced, right? Laser could do some of the job as well today, right? It's not just a cut in the skin, right? So there's different factors that play a role. What else? What other things intrigue you? Oh, I think 1275 Barcelona. Is it appropriate to inscribe the donor's name on a synagogue annex that he donated? I think we know the answer, right? Big yes. Every synagogue, you can't run away from the plaques, right? But it was an issue then, because you're highlighting a specific person. You're as if even testifying, you're putting that person on a pedestal, so to speak, that person is now to be honored. Who said everything that person does is honorable, right? In fact, after the Bernie Madoff story, there was a shul, not mentioning which one, but they had a plaque that he donated something through an associate, but his name was on there, and it was a problem because this person's a disgrace. The money he donated with was stolen money, but in the end of the day, he did give the donation. What do you do? I ended up taking it off just to be curious. But you look at this list; it's fascinating. 1975 Jerusalem, Rabbi Obadiah Yosef. This was the chief rabbi of Israel. Should terrorists be released in order to free the hostages held in Entebbe? Remember the Entebbe story? It was luckily they did the raid, but they were contemplating then maybe following the demands. And do you release terrorists? And you think, why not? Well, these people will end up going back to what they've done already. In fact, today we know that some of the terrorists that were released to free Gilad Shalit performed recent acts of terror in Israel, killing others. So you're saving a life, but at whose expense? Fascinating list, and I wish we could dive into each of the topics, but it just gives us a quick overview of what we're talking about. Okay, let's run through a little of the history of Jewish law, how it progressed, like where it went to from the times of the Talmud until today, and then we'll spend the end of the class on discussing maybe some of the topics that were raised here, okay? Time permitting. I already said in the intro how Talmud records the discussions, right? The discussions that were raised, and here they compare it to raw material. So think of want to compare it to food, think of the Torah as the farmer. It comes from the ground, it's the original, it's real, it's organic, right? And then it moves to the next part, processing, and that's the raw material, which is the Talmud's discussions, it's the back and forth. But after that, there needs to be a clear process on what to do next. Think of it as having the ingredients and then wanting the recipe. What's the recipe to make the salad, the brownie. Jewish law gives you the recipe. Doesn't tell you what are the nutrients of the tomato and what are the benefits of a cucumber. It just says, if you want a salad, this is how you do it. And the example that I gave you earlier with reading the Shema, the left side is how the Shema is presented in the Mishnah and then Gemara. And on the right side is from Maimonides, his Mishnah Torah, where he gives you the actual law itself. Here's what you do. So not just what you assume we know and the boundaries. Here he says, here's when it's done, here's how it's done, and check out this section of this book that follows the laws of prayer, and this is how it moves on from A to Z. So let's say Maimonides today, Rambam, as it's called in Hebrew, you want to know the laws of milk and meat. So you open up that section, the foods, and it goes on, clear. Here's what to do, A, B, C, D. Without getting confused with the background and the opinions. The opinions aren't relevant. Not that aren't relevant, they're just not practical instructions of how to move forward. And all we're trying to do is live our lives. If you want to study, you could spend time studying on your own. But to know what to do, when you get that bookshelf from IKEA, you don't care where the wood's from. Just tell me where do I put the screw and how I put this thing up without breaking my head, right? And that's what Jewish law did. All right. This I mentioned earlier, how the Mishnah was transcribed simply to record the discussions and the background and the reasoning. And Jewish law does not, that's not its purpose, it's not what it's trying to do. Okay, now, what happened since the Talmud is this. During the Talmud, although there was the Babylonian and then the Jerusalem times, but at one point, everyone reached some sort of consensus on what was being passed on. The consensus was that Mishnah is final. There's no argument to the authenticity of the Mishnah or its teachings. The Gemara was final, either Jerusalem or the Babylonian, but the Gemara is final. What happened since, and this is in later years, of course, you could see it in your map from what years. What happened since is that especially today, we're given way more access to information. It's not difficult to gather information these days. Ignorance today is a choice, really, because you can learn anything on any subject if you just put your mind to it. It's available for free online, right? What happened since is because they didn't reach consensus any longer. So you have the Ashkenazic and the Sephardic, right? Ashkenazic, the German speaking, even Russian, part of Russia, Eastern European, and then Sephardic would be Spain, but also grew into North Africa and the Middle Eastern countries. They're considered Sephardic or Mizrahi. Because they didn't reach consensus, they started each working on their own laws, compiling them, and there wasn't a single person who everyone agreed that they're the final say. There is no final any longer. And that means that people started zeroing in on single subjects, especially in the last, I'll say 500 years. We've become way more niche oriented, that rabbis have become experts in specific areas. All about burial, all about giving birth, all about not even in foods. There are some that are experts in drinks, and some that are experts in earlier process agriculture. People became specialists. You look at the medical field and you see it's something a bit similar. Not a bit similar, very similar perhaps. But you had Back in the day, you had the one doctor, you go for everything, almost, and today there's a specialist on everything, right? Eyes, one, ears, another, shoulder, right? Everything is zeroed in. I think it's a positive thing. It could be confusing sometimes because you're bouncing from one to the other, but you have people who become just masters of their field. And that's what happened since. They became masters of certain areas. Now, the names that we'll mention today are more, they're the ones who were masters of the entire field, but in the years since, you have people who became specialized. Like there's a rabbi I consult with regularly, but he is honest enough to say, I don't know, on subjects that he might know, but he isn't proficient in to the extent that he's not comfortable ruling. So such people are called a posek, P-O-S-E-K. P-O-S-E-K, posek. A posek would be translated as a ruler, someone who rules. So he's not a judge with a position necessarily. It's just someone who is recognized enough to be an authority of halacha of Jewish law. So he, for example, whenever I have questions about burial, about afterlife, he's like, Yuri, I'm sorry, you have to go to someone else. Like he's quick to say, I don't know. And I'll go to another person that I consult with from Brooklyn as well. Like he's the expert in burial and afterlife issues. So I go to him. And different areas, you have that as well. So over time, we've I can't say we've fractured, but I feel like we've expanded because each area we became so knowledgeable in that you have people that became masters of each of these areas. Okay, to understand the makeup of Jewish law, similar to what we did in the Medrash, here are 4 categories, 4 types of laws that we have, and you have it. I think you have this on page figure 4.2. Yeah, figure 4.2 on page 158. You have to turn the book to the side. What you see here, you see you have the three colors, and let's look at, you see it on the screen. You have the digest. These are the books that give you what's the final, they're more encyclopedic, so they give you, this is the final decision. In final text, there are no sources, there is no reasoning or background, just you want to know, this is it. Now, you have the codes, they're arranged the laws by topics, and they're easy to go to. You have a question, you open up the book and you look for that section, you find it. Then you have the commentaries, and they already give you the background, the discussions that were given, the debates about each law. And then you have the fourth one, which is what I'll describe all halachic works today, and that's called responsa. In Hebrew, it's called shailus utshuvas, which literally means the questions and answers. But in English, it's called responsa. And another word in Hebrew, it's called shut, which is the acronym of sheilot utshuvot, questions and answers. And what they do is they deal with modern questions that come up, like we've seen earlier with that map of the world, all these questions, twins and driving, that's responsa. Okay. And you look at these 2 pages and you could see all these famous works. Who did what? Who did what? Who are codes? Who are commentaries? Who are digests? So in the sense of Jewish law, of halacha, the Talmud is considered commentary. Not a code, Not a digest, it's considered commentary. Why? Because it's discussing the background and everything around it. Obviously, the Torah is not a category, but everything that follows, this is pretty much the tree of halacha, the tree of Jewish law. And I don't think you have this, this map is not available online. Okay, so it's pretty cool to see this all on one page clearly and mapping everything out. So this is something worth, and I don't know what you do with your books after the classes, but this is something worth keeping together with that big map that you have. So you look at the Talmud and let me give you an example of 1-2. You have Maimonides, right? You have with the commentary written about him. You have the Marshal, Ramah. So you see the Shulchan Aruch, you see that blue line, right? Shulchan Aruch is what you would refer today as the basic book of Jewish law.
Is there an Ashkenazic equivalent?
Oh, good question. The Shulchan Aruch, which literally means the set table.
Yeah, just rewind.
Set table. Shulchan is a table, Aruch means set. This was written by a rabbi who moved from Rabbi Yosef Karo. I think he moved from Spain. And he settles in the city of Tzfat in northern Israel. And there he starts writing the Shulchan Aruch, which is known today as the Code of Jewish Law. This is like the basic go-to book for laws. And he's writing it. He's writing it, and he's writing the entire code that would describe. It comes out in 4 sections, 4 volumes: Orach Chaim, Yerodea, Choshe Mishpat, Even Ezer. Each one is civil law, business dealings, daily life, married or relations, and then you have laws of kashrus. So each one dealing with another. While he was writing that book, you had someone named the Ramah, who, here, let me find it on the map. All right, it's on. Yeah.
Just about.
Oh, yeah, I see it. Yeah, perfect. So while he was writing that, another rabbi was doing the exact same thing. And then someone tells him, oh, there is a new book coming out. Have you seen it? And he's like, no. They show him Rabbi Karo's book. It was called the Bet Yosef. And he's like, oh my work's gone. Right? I can't come out with my copy when he came out with his. It's the exact same idea. So he starts studying what the Bet Yosef wrote, and he figures out that the Bet Yosef was, I can't say slanted, but really took a more Sephardic approach to law. And he's like, okay, he wrote that, which was important, but we have Ashkenazic Jews have our own ways. So what he did was he started writing commentary. He took his book, and then areas that he disagreed with the Bet Yosef, he added his points to. And he called it Aruch HaShulchan. See the play of words?
Yeah.
Shulchan Aruch means a set table. Aruch HaShulchan could be the tablecloth to the table. So he's like, I'm not ruining your table, but I'm adding it to your table. And so he gave the Ashkenazic version. And you see, since then, each of these teachings have been discussed, and it goes down to, let's look at the bottom left. Bottom left. Actually, Aruch HaShulchan was a different work from his. It was based on what the other one did. But the bottom left, you have the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is the abbreviated version of the Code of Jewish Law. So instead of 4 heavy books about everything, one person, a German rabbi, puts it all into one small book, easy to follow. And in areas that he had a question, he took the stricter approach just to make sure that people follow it. And it's available in English. It's a great, if you want a starter book from this entire list, that would be the starter book to discover Jewish law. It's called the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and
The Cliff Notes.
it's clip notes, but sometimes clip notes are difficult to read. Here, it's fully understood. Like as kids, we would study the Kitzur. So it's really, it's the beginners and it's everything. So it has it all from everything else, which you could easily get lost in. All right. Went through some history there. All right, let's discuss the halachic process, okay? Let's discuss the process of halacha. Did I show you the video? Not yet. All right, maybe I'll show you the video of Jewish law just to get a recap of it. Like the past weeks, you saw that video. So I might put it on the screen shortly, but let's start diving in here. Okay. How does Jewish law work? Okay. So we'll take today a case. That we'll study it and we'll see what the backing for it was. So let's go to page. Okay, let's go to page, let's see what page this is on. All right, page 169, text 17. Okay. Let's pick it up. And then we'll go back when needed. I just think it's a better way to study this. Okay. This is a case of somewhat chilling scenario of a very chilling time. And I'm referring to the Second World War. There was a rabbi named Rabbi Ephraim Oshri. He was from Kovna, which is in Lithuania at the time. Kovna was a large city after Vilnius, and he was taken after the Nazis invaded Lithuania in June 1941. He was taken to a ghetto, and he, amongst everyone else, was forced to live this horrible life with forced labor and all. And during this time, fascinatingly enough, during this time, he as a rabbi, he was the address of halachic questions that people had in the ghetto. Because just because you're being killed doesn't mean we should stop being Jewish. Logical? I don't know, but that was their way of life. And they still addressed all these questions. Some questions were questions that come up today, and some questions are only questions that come up while living through a Holocaust. One question goes as follows, and you have this in text 17. He goes like this. On the 16th of, on Elul 16, this is 1941, September 8th, the Nazi SS commander, Gok, his name was, arrived in Lithuania. It was he who in the end liquidated the Kovno ghetto. The reputation of this evil and bloodthirsty murderer has preceded him, evoking panic among those imprisoned in the ghetto, and immediately upon his arrival, he executed a number of Jews. At that time, there arose the issue of the notorious white cards. The matter was as follows. Yardan, his name was, the German commander of the Kovno ghetto, instructed the Jewish council to distribute among the workers in the ghetto 5,000 white cards, which he gave to them. These individuals would be the only ones allowed to remain in the ghetto with their families, while the rest would be liquidated. At the time, there were about 30,000 Jews in the ghetto, including 10,000 workers. Again, 30,000, 5,000 could be saved. That's it. I was asked, are those who are grabbing white cards for themselves to save themselves, are they acting properly, knowing that they are preventing another Jewish family from being saved? Every card you take is a card someone else cannot take. Now, that's the question he was asked. And he saved these questions and answers in little, they buried them in tin cans. So he wrote them, I think, on sackcloths. He wrote these questions over time and when he answered them, and he buried them. And this rabbi luckily survived the Holocaust and passed away in 2003. So he lived a long, beautiful life, and he published these questions under Chuvos Mimamakim, which translates to answers from the depths, as in from the abyss. That's what he called it. So that's the question we're exploring. He's asked this question. What do you think about this question? Could someone go take these cards? Now, let's clarify this question so we understand it correctly. The question wasn't posed to him by the ones giving out the cards. Okay, we'll get to that. But this question is not about the ones giving out, the Jewish council. This is about people who are able to sneak into the office where these cards are sitting and steal some for their family. And they ask him, are we doing the right thing? Just to show you the sensitivity of life then, there was a story where this dad turns to a rabbi, I forgot his name, turns to a rabbi and tells him that my son is now in the hospital, this is during Second World War, under the Nazis, my son's in the hospital. I met the guy guarding him, and the guy didn't mind if I bribed him and he would release my son. You know, whoever's sick too long, they shot, right? So I could bribe the guard, and I could take my son back to the barracks to be with me, and I'll spend time with him until he heals. The caveat is, the guard said, I'll take the bribe, I'll let your son out, but I need to take another boy, Jewish boy, to replace his spot. So they don't recognize what went on. So he turns to the rabbi and says, what do I do? And the rabbi says, I can't tell you. He's like, what do you mean you can't tell me? He says, I mean, there might be a ruling on this subject, but I can't rule. This is like, my words, way too crazy of a scenario. Like, I can't rule. And the father insists, no, I need to know if I'm doing something wrong, or I'm doing something right by saving my son, but am I doing it while doing something wrong? And again, the rabbi says, I'm like almost with tears, I can't rule here. And listen what the father says. He says, if this was permitted, you would have outright told me, yeah, it's okay. But you're hesitating, which means it's problematic. And if it's problematic, I cannot do it. And he didn't. And his son sadly was killed. But it was a decision that he made. Do I have the right to exchange a life of my son for someone else's life? Whose life is more important? So this rabbi is dealing with a similar scenario, so to speak, right? Every card that's taken, it's someone else that can get it. It's not like they're saying, okay, these cards will expire on Tuesday, first come, first serve, grab. No, these cards will be given out. They will be given out to people in the ghetto, and there's no more cards coming. Tough, right? Yeah.
Is there a distinction with whether these cards were already specifically designated for somebody, or they were just generic cards that were going to go? I would say if they were already designated to Shmuel and somebody takes them, then he knows that he's specifically causing this person to die.
Correct.
Is there a distinction there?
There is a distinction. For example, this is another scenario, but I'm throwing it in. Yeah. She's asking if the cards were designated to, if the German said these cards are for the following names, would it change the question of whether or not you're allowed to steal it? And the answer is yes. Here's why. Let's say me and a friend are now walking from, I don't know, Tucson to Yuma, or Yuma to Las Vegas, for example. We're walking, there's only enough water for one of us. Okay? Sun's beating, no one's around, our phone, we don't have phones. What do? Share? That means both of us die halfway. There's exact water to have one of us survive. Huh? Strongest? I mean, that's
I think.
not fair. Why should the strongest one drink more, survive? How do you know? Saying the scenario is that you have enough water for one person to make it until the next gas station.
Who does it belong to?
Oh, okay. Now, who does it belong to? Now, let's say it belongs to me. My friend was stupid. He did not come with water while in the desert. I went with water, okay? Now, let's say it belongs to me. Do I have an obligation to share it with him? He's dying. There's a life dying here. I have an obligation to share? So, you think so? Well, that means my death. And I'm talking about in case that it's certain, it's not questionable, it's certain that it's either him or me.
I think you don't have the obligation, because when you're obligated to help somebody, you're on your first obligation.
So you're saying that, or not share? Okay, so I don't have to share, that is correct. I do not have to share the bottle if it's coming at my expense. Now, here's another question. Am I allowed to share? I don't have to share. There's a difference, right? Jewish law says you don't have to share it, but am I allowed to?
I would suggest no.
Because that's in fact, committing suicide.
So the answer would be yes. I am allowed to share. I'm allowed to share. It's commendable. It's not required. Yes, but I've not done something that immediately kills me. It would be considered passive. And there's a difference. Because who knows, maybe there'll be a car driving by. A group of folks with a ton of beer, and not only I'll get drink, I would also party with them. You never know, right? So it's not certain death. It's likely death, but I have the right, I don't know the right, but you could even say the privilege that if I want, I could sacrifice myself for someone else. Are people from the Secret Service suicidal? No, but they're ready to take a bullet when needed. Right? Everyone wants to live, right? But they're willing to do that. They're willing to sacrifice their life when needed. Now, just to keep your brain flying there, What if the bottle belongs to none of them? The bottle is there, they're walking, they see a bottle of water.
That's like what the other people that they're.
Hmm? What?
Like the story about. And then they would have to share.
What if I got it first?
You get the first sip.
Well, I'm allowed to grab it first. It doesn't belong to him, and I didn't deprive him of it. What if he has this bottle? I'm giving you Talmud examples here of how we twist things, but what if he has a bottle? Am I allowed to save my life? Am I allowed to steal water from him while he looks away? He went to the side to do something. Am I allowed to quickly sit? No. I'm taking from his life. Now, what if we walk by a store and we don't have a dime on us? We walk by a store and there's bottles of water there. The seller does not care about us, would not insist that we must pay. Are you allowed to steal a bottle? Hmm?
If you wouldn't insist to pay the owner, then you wouldn't really be stealing. You would be giving them.
Stealing is still stealing. He says you must pay. We stop by a gas station and he's like, we have water, you have to pay for it, and we don't have money. Am I allowed to steal money?
Larger something.
Doesn't want to hear it. Am I allowed to steal water? The answer is yes. Saving your life. You're allowed to do the beer walk, like they go into Circle K with the pack of beer and run out. You're allowed to do the beer walk, the water walk.
So is that qualified in any way? Like, yes, but you have to base it up to it?
Oh, of course, later, if you survive this ordeal, you should pay back. Yeah, needless to say. But I guess I should say it, yeah. But just because you needed to do this on the spot doesn't excuse you later from covering for it.
You know what?
Yeah.
Terrible question.
Okay.
It's related to this young Robinson who passed away this week.
Yeah.
She tried to save her 4-month-old baby from drowning. She landed up on life support and died herself.
Mhm.
Was she doing the right thing? And let's assume she couldn't swim. To try and save her child. How do you answer that question?
So. There is a Chabad Rebbitzin in the Virgin Islands, St. Thomas, 40 years old. Her name was Henya Fetterman. Her baby fell into the water. She jumped into the water. I think a few-month-old baby. She jumped into the water to save the baby. I think not only she didn't know how to swim, she was afraid of water, actually. She jumps in, she ends up on life support, and she passed away this past week.
And unfortunately, she didn't save the baby.
She did not save the baby, no. Sadly, it's my brother-in-law's sister.
Oh.
So, yeah. I was there this Sunday in New York for the Shiva. So you look at such a case, first you could say that in a moment of emergency, there is no logic. So, you don't think. But the chances of her saving the baby were a nice percentage because she's an adult and the baby is a baby, right? So it's not like it's possibly like she has a fair chance, and risking your life to save another is permitted, right? It's the same idea that I said earlier about taking a bullet for someone else or willingly giving the water to someone else, because there's no immediate death with jumping into water. People do that all the time in a swimming pool. They're not risking their lives walking into the sun, right? But in this case, she was allowed to risk her life for that. I'll give you another case. You're mentioning a Rebbitzin. I don't remember the name of this person, but this happened a while ago. Of someone risking their life in an area that's not about saving life, okay? I think it was a few rabbis were like, and their spouses, they were traveling, they're on a boat. And at some point, this boat was taken by pirates or some sort, some thieves. And they captured the boat, and it happened to be the wife of one of the rabbis. The Rebbitzin was very good looking. And the thieves immediately took notice of her, and they removed her from the rest of the group, and they made very clear what their intentions are to do with her. And right before she's taken off, she asks her husband, and without getting to legal terms, but her question is, will I still merit to the world to come? And he right away understands what she's asking. She's about to be violated in a horrible way. And that's just now. You don't know what's happening later. Like it could be an ongoing ordeal for a few months on the boat. I mean, who knows what's going on? And her question is, if I jump off, is it considered suicide or not? And his answer was no. And she did just that. She jumps off the boat and ends her life, but saves her soul in a way. So these decisions are on a regular, but you could, from the scenario you gave, are come up and they're addressed, because if we try to look at the source of trying to find out what this rabbi ruled in the Kovno ghetto, you look back and let's look at other texts that will show this. Let's look at text 12. Okay. Trying to understand what they're saying. Okay. A person came before Rava and said to him, the chief of my village sent to me, kill so-and-so, and if you do not do so, I will kill you. What do I do? Rava said to him, let yourself be killed rather than you should kill. Why do you think that your blood is redder than theirs? Perhaps the blood of that person is redder. That was the ruling that he gave. What does this mean? That if you want to go back to the Second World War, or other times for that matter, if the Nazis surrounded a synagogue or came to a city and said, if you give us 5 of you, we'll spare the rest. Could the people in the synagogue choose, even by a raffle, who should be the 5 that should go out? Well, it's 5 versus 500. Would you rather 500 get killed? Good question, right? And the answer is no. Why no? Do we prefer 500 dead? No, of course not. But the choice of who lives is not ours.
So
by choosing them, we're making a choice that you die. Now we don't have the right.
but someone could sort of volunteer.
Yes, yes, yes. 5 people could stand up and say, we're going out to save the rest. Yeah. And people have done that. People have done that. But the point is that we cannot choose for someone else when your expiration date is.
So that's why you said a big difference if the cards are designated for.
Exactly. If the cards are under someone else's name and you take the card, you're taking the life from a person.
How about random chance?
Random chance in the white cards?
Yeah.
There's no random chance because
May not know.
every,
Different person. Die, would you know?
but you know someone will.
Yeah.
They said they'll liquidate everyone, they are liquidating everyone else. The chances of them changing their mind is almost zero, right? So whose blood is redder, right? It's a question, and this spills over into all these different cases of life is sacred. We cannot choose to take a life, so we guard someone else's life, but we also have to guard our own life because your obligation is first to yourself. There are exceptions, right? I told you, like the woman that jumping, the Rebbitzin jumping off a boat, or Rebbitzin jumping in the water in the Virgin Islands, that you're there to save someone else's life. Or you're there, let's say there's a statement that, you know, back like the Hanukkah story, for example, when you have them stating that whoever does some transgression in public as an act of revolt against God, such cases are called Yehareg Val Yavor. In these cases, one should be killed instead of doing it because it's a public statement for God. But those are exceptions. The rule is that you protect your life and you try to protect everyone around you. So these dilemmas that come up about how you approach these things with this rabbi, for example, he ruled in the Kovno ghetto. He ruled that you're allowed to steal the cards because they were given as a whole. They weren't designated to a single person. Because you know that your life will be saved, then you should do whatever you could to take those cards. So you're indirectly causing someone else not to have it, but it's not direct.
Then there's a very interesting situation.
Yep.
You can take one call. Don't take five and still remain fair. So.
It was one per
Give
family.
away.
It was one card per family. That's a good question. Could you have taken a card to give it to a few friends? I think that would be okay too. I think because let's say someone was brave enough to break into the office, right? That already is risking their lives. They break into the office and they get a hold of these white cards. The fact that by passing a card, you're saving someone else's life, that's fair. I'll give you an example, okay? And this is also discussed in Jewish law. There's your earthquake in Turkey, okay? The hospitals there don't have enough room for everyone. So you have all these patients being brought all at once to the hospital. The medical staff there are obviously overwhelmed. What do you do? Okay. So you have a staff of, let's simplify, you have a staff of 10 people and facing 50 cases. How do they go to treat them? The emergency room is packed, ER is packed. What do? Well, triage, right? And you say, wait, that isn't fair. Shouldn't it be first come, first serve? No, Jewish law says that they have to set the parameters to what their priorities are. And if someone has an ankle in their foot, it might be hurting like hell, but if someone has a heart condition, they have the right to say, we're treating that first. What if it's not an ankle? What if the person's bleeding away? Well, still, whatever parameters they set, that's what they should follow. Why? Because the moment there are no rules, there's nothing. Which means if you got one of those cards and you're able to give it to someone, that's a choice that you're allowed to make.
You can steal it from the office, but not once from someone who's died.
Exactly. If someone else got a hold of the card, taking it away from that person would be wrong. And although, just let me say, during the Holocaust, people regularly stole other people's food. And that may have been wrong in our eyes, but I don't think we have any right to judge that. So, we're mentioning this because this case came up and he asked, but I wouldn't pass judgment on how people acted at that time. Yeah.
So if you took 5 cards, one is for your family, and then you've got 10 close friends and family, and you're deciding who's gonna say, well, not you then playing God and saying you're gonna live and you're gonna die. By who you, I mean, I can see taking one for yourself, but if you're taking enough and you're gonna hand them out, then you're kind of putting yourself in that position of deciding who's gonna live and die.
I don't think you're deciding who's going to die. I see it more as who's going to live. See, that's the difference between, it's called a proaction or inaction. And here you're doing something, but it's not like you're actually pulling a trigger on someone. So you're indirectly causing someone else not to have that. But think about it. Should you feel bad every time you buy food because you're depriving someone else of that tomato? I mean, there's no end to it.
But say this is on your family, like, extended family, and you have 3 cards left, and there's 7 people who want them.
And you don't give it to the annoying uncle, right? I don't know, that's between you and God and the uncle, I don't know. But you see how these cases have come up. Let's go to the very end. Let's do page 177. Go to the end because we got a few more minutes. Okay. Okay. So remember the case of the twins? Yeah, so we have 5 minutes left. I think let's dedicate it to that. Okay, sounds fun, right? So Rabbi Moshe Feinstein receives this request about the conjoined twins. This is 1977. The doctor at the time was, I think, Edwards. Coop, yeah. Coop is the one who stated that before we make any decision about this, we have to seek the Jewish opinion from the Lower East Side. I think that was his line. And Dr. Coop passes it on to Rabbi Feinstein. I think he consulted with other faiths as well, other religious leaders as well, but he specifically wanted Rabbi Feinstein. Rabbi Feinstein, who already passed, he was considered the foremost posek of North America of the last generation. Remember I mentioned the word posek? So he was that authority. And he has this book called Igros Moshe, things that are studied until today. And he examined this case on the following rule. There's a rule called Din Rodef. Rodef is R-O-D-E-F. Rodef literally means chasing. And the rule of Rodef goes as follows. If someone threatens to kill your life, you don't have the right to kill them first. Because it's a threat. Doesn't mean they're going to go along with it. They threaten, they could change their mind. It's not final, right? They threaten. Now, what happens if someone is chasing you with a knife or a gun, a loaded gun? As in there's imminent danger. What do you do then that you're threatened? Then you have the right to defend yourself. not just defend yourself, you're allowed to kill that person. So not just shoot him in the leg, like, Israel suggested at some point, right? Shoot the terrorist in the leg, because they've done that, then the terrorist killed another 2 people after that. So now they aim where it counts, let's call it. Din Rodef is that a life could be taken to save your life. You're not playing God, you're playing survivor. Now, the Din Rodef plays itself out, let's say in childbirth, where the doctor says it's either the baby or the mom. What do you do then? So the baby, in some ways, is considered a rodef. Sounds dramatic, but the baby's risking the mother's life. So the mother's life comes first. Okay? That's only while the baby is in the womb. Why it's while the baby's in the womb? Because while the baby's considered a life, it's not considered an independent life. So my finger is a living organ, but it can't live without being connected to me, right? So the fetus, the baby, is considered a life on its own, a soul of its own, but because it doesn't have independency, it's not a life in that sense. And let's say the baby threatening the mother's life, is permissible to kill the baby, however difficult that sounds, to kill the baby because you're in a way cutting off a finger to save the body. Okay? Far beyond the abortion politics these days, right? But to save the life. Now, in this case, with the twins, what Rabbi Feinstein asked the doctor was, could any of them, of the twins, live without the other? Could they live independently? Like if you do the Solomon's ruling, or split into half, could they still live? And he looked at these laws of Rodef, which is text 21. He looked at the innocent Rodef. You could look, you see, this is text 22. This is by his son-in-law. He discussed this. He wrote, 2 men jump out of a burning airplane. The parachute of the first man opens and he falls slowly and safely to earth. The parachute of the second man does not open. As he plunges past his friend, he manages to grab onto his foot and hold on, but the parachute is too small to support both of them. Now they are both plunging to their death. Is it morally justified for the first man to kick his friend because they would both die if he didn't? So he took such a case, and in this case, the parachute, for example, there is a din rodef because that person is threatening your life. The fact that you're kicking him off your parachute will send that person to death, but he's threatening you by latching onto your parachute. So you have the right to kick him off. Now, with life endangering birth, I gave you the example. And let's look at text 24. The Talmud discusses, Rav Chisda raised the objection to Rav Huna. The Mishnah says, if a fetus's head has emerged, we may not touch it, for we may not set aside one life for another's sake. But why? The fetus is a rodef. And Talmud responds, that case is different because as she is being pursued from heaven. And maybe I shouldn't have read that, it just confuses a bit. But sorry, I'll skip that. It's a whole different discussion. Let's get to text 25 to hear the conclusion. Early September 1977 in Lakewood, New Jersey, Siamese twins were born to a prestigious family of Torah educators. The twins were taken by helicopter to a children's hospital in Philadelphia, where Dr. C. Everett Koop, who subsequently became Surgeon General of the United States, was then the hospital's chief of surgery. Immediately after the initial evaluation, it was obvious to all the physicians called in to evaluate the twins that both would die unless they are separated. However, The only way one child would be viable was if the other child was killed during the surgery. The question was referred to Moshe Feinstein for his evaluation decision. The children designated as baby A and baby B shared one 6-chambered heart. The wall separating the essentially normal 4 chambers from the other 2, most likely the stunted heart of baby A was too thin to be divided. It was not possible to give the 2-chambered heart to baby A. The entire 6-chamber heart had to be given to baby B, and the life of baby A would have been sacrificed. It was clear to all concerned that this was a major ethical issue. Nurses and doctors at the Children's Hospital consulted with the religious guides, and they reported back that they would not be able to participate in the surgery based on what they were told by their religious leaders. When the team of 20 or so professionals were awaiting Rabbi Feinstein's decision, and indeed were expressing impatience with the lapse of time, Dr. Koop quipped, "The ethics and morals involved in this decision are too complex for me. I believe they are too complex for you as well. Therefore, I referred to an old rabbi in the Lower East Side of New York. He is a great scholar, a saintly individual, and he knows how to answer the questions. When he tells me, I too will know." Okay. So, yeah. So Rabbi Feinstein's key question to Dr. Koop, as I said, would it be possible for the heart to give the heart of baby A so that baby A would be the one that would live? Could you transfer the heart to one? And the answer that Dr. Koop says was no. I'm not able to do that. And so the only options were to either not separate the babies, in which both of them would die, or to give the heart to baby B, in which case baby B would live. And in a way, in other words, baby A would be completely dependent on its attachment, so like the liver, and and this led to Rabbi Feinstein to conclude that the relationship between the 2 babies was comparable to the relationship of an unborn fetus to its mother, in which the fetus dependent's life is secondary to the mother's independent life. And that's how he ruled. He ruled that baby B, because it has the heart and baby A is living off its heart, baby B is the one who has the independent life, and therefore its life should be saved. So that's just one example of all the questions that we brought up, of how Jewish law continues to deal with day-to-day issues, day-to-day challenges, and makes it livable, not just livable, but also makes it a moral way to continue living on a regular basis.